Good morning. This is Lisa Marie Garcia. I'm with Now Publishing, and this is Now Conversations, our Saturday morning conversations with authors. So thank you for joining us. Very happy to be here, really because of our guest today. Very excited for you all to meet our guest, but also because I've had my caffeine and I'm continuing to have it. So let's just hop right into the show here. And again, welcome. I'm always waiting for that cough or that music to come in, and then I remember that we don't have it. How's that? Just kidding. Okay. All right. So good morning. Hello, everyone. So today we're doing a little switcheroo on you in terms of our Saturday morning authors, but you're going to be so excited that you joined us and that you're watching this broadcast, whether it's live or whether you're watching it later as we rebroadcast it. Okay, I said I had caffeine, but for some reason I'm not speaking very articulately. So let me hope that starts to happen. All right, so I don't want you to hear from me. I want you to hear from our guest. I want to introduce him. So let me just tell you a little bit about him. So his name is Matt Mason, and he is the current Nebraska State Poet. He runs poetry workshops in Botswana, Romania, Nepal, and Belarus for the United States, for the U.S. State Department. His poetry has appeared in the New York Times, and he has received a Pushcart Prize, as well as fellowships for the Academy of American Poets and the Nebraskan Arts Council. His work can be found in Rattle, Poet Lore, Prairie Schooner, and hundreds of other publications. So we're going to be talking today about that, but we're also going to talk about his fourth book that I love the title. That's called At the Corner of Fantasy in Maine, Disneyland, Midlife and Churros. It was published by Old Mill Press, and this is probably I would say it's 1/100th of his bio, because as I was looking into him, oh my gosh, he is such an accomplished writer, and we're very fortunate that he's our first time author of poetry. So I'm so excited to talk to him. So welcome, Matt Mason, to the show.
Hey, thank you so much, Lisa. It's great to be here.
Oh, well, thank you for joining us, and just excited for our prospective writers and current authors and all those that watch Now Conversations to get to know about writing poetry, and then also being so accomplished and acclaimed that you are in what you've been doing. And we know one thing for certain: it doesn't happen overnight. So I'm excited to dig into that. Right? You know, nothing good is easy. What I tell my daughters all the time: nothing great is ever easy. So let's just dig in there. So I just want to start with how does one become the state poet, the Nebraska State Poet? Can you share that?
So there's a process every 5 years. It starts with public nominations, and it's run through 3 arts agencies who select finalists who propose a project. My project is to bring at least one poetry event to every county in Nebraska over the 5 years, and there's 93 counties. So it's not the worst project unless there's a pandemic. But then they send the name of one of the finalists to the governor, and then you get to be state poet. So
and I was going to ask that exact question: how many counties are there? So, I mean, that is an over full-time job, and then that was probably just part of what you do, not everything. So, quite an effort. But congratulations for sure.
No, it's a real honor.
That's pretty crazy great. Well, so as I read in, and again, it's just a little bit of your bio that we read to start the show. There's so many works. We're going to talk about and dig in a little bit about your most recent release. But, the Pushcart Prize, for those of you that don't know, has been around since the 70s. And it is the most honored, literary project in America. I mean, it's really, I don't know that everyone knows that the title Pushcart Prize, but how outstanding. Can you talk about your journey there? And just, you know, it's what a great thing that you achieved that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that was a real surprise, and I'm just so grateful for. It's a one of those things where you've got something like a 1 in 9,000 chance of being selected, because they have so many entrants. Um,
Right.
and even if you send something you think is amazing, you still like can't think I'm definitely going to win this. So when I heard back that I had actually been selected, it was just fantastic. Just grateful. Yeah, but you always have to wonder. It's like, did my poems reach the desk right after the editor had like a great lunch and was relaxed and was feeling good? But whatever the case,
Right.
I'll take it. So
And what year was it that you received that?
that was 2012.
Wow. It's funny, that human factor, like you were talking about. It's almost
Yeah.
likened to, when you write a book and you're writing it for a certain genre, and that, I mean, there's still that human element. And, we use it as a positive where, yes, the book is for, women, just as an example, that want meditation, that want journaling. But, there's also the husband that might pick it up, and then it feeds them. So it's funny that you say that, but it is true. I mean, even with just in our industry, a book distributor, are they looking at your book at the time where they might consider it against another title to carry, but do they hate the color green, and then they just happen to notice it, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
crazy, but it's us humans, right? Any
Yeah.
factor
There's a lot of skill involved,
could
but
be
there's
there.
also
So
a lot of
that's
chance.
fantastic. And I encourage anyone, before we leave this subject, go ahead. Yeah,
Oh,
you kind of broke up a bit for me. I think it's my
oh,
internet.
sorry.
Sorry. But can you say again what you said? Sorry.
Um, uh, I just can't even remember what I said, so sorry.
Oh,
Oh,
okay. All right. So, what I was going to recommend is anyone that doesn't know what the Pushcart Prize is, Google it, read about it, so you can learn a little bit more. I think that's awesome. So, what we like to do on this show is talk to authors about their journey, and maybe let viewers learn what might be something they hadn't considered. Many people, you probably have met them in your journey, have been sitting on poetry they wanted to publish, have gotten the manuscript together in Word docs, but just never take that, step and that commitment to publish. Can you tell us a little bit about the very first poem in your journey that you had published, whether it was a book or not, but just how did you do it? How did you, I say, jump off the diving board and actually get into the pool?
it was a long time ago. It was back when you had to use self-addressed stamped envelopes when you sent your work to a magazine. But I'd been writing for a while, or not written, well, a few years, and sent some things out, and actually was placed in a competition for form poetry from a small magazine called The Lyric. Um, who, and it was, again, a big surprise because I'd sent things to a few other magazines, didn't understand the whole thing. Now, there's a lot of rejection in this because there's, at a literary magazine, they're getting hundreds or thousands of poems to look at, and they have to choose 10. So again, you hope you get that editor right after they've
Right.
had a great lunch, the soup was warm, everything was good, and they're in the right mood, and you find the right work to send out to them. It just takes a little bit of time, a little bit of patience, and not worrying about rejections, because everybody gets those, even state poets.
So, right. So, do you remember how were you notified? Was it via mail, or do you remember that finally not the rejection that we're gonna publish your poem? Do you remember that day? Even now, as
Uh,
long as it's been.
yeah, yeah, a little bit, just because it was mail. Because this was, God, when was this? Probably late '80s. So, not much done on email with literary
Yeah,
magazines yet.
yeah,
So, but yeah, I've
yeah.
still got the letter, and it is just very exciting to say, oh, all right, I'm now a published author and not just some guy sitting in on a college campus writing poems. So,
Well, and so then, how many years then was it approximately? And I'm sorry, I'm hitting you with all these, numbers and memories. How many years ago? But it is what I do. So you went from we're publishing your poetry in a magazine, and then I assume multiple magazines, and then to your first book. How was that journey, and how did
yeah,
that
that was
happen?
that was much longer. Because yeah, I started publishing poems in the late '80s, and my first book came out in 2006, which felt like a long time. But in between there, I gotten a master's degree and you know moved back to Omaha and had been running poetry events, helping other writers, doing local writing workshops and all kinds of things for years, and just kind of sending things out to magazines and being patient about it, and kind of waited until I'd had a fair amount of poems published before I started to even think about putting a manuscript of poems together, and then approaching publishers. So yeah.
Well, I love that. And I'm glad you brought up the subject about, as I read in your bio, conducting these writer workshops. Do you let all writers, nonfiction and fiction and poetry writers in, or is it specifically tailored towards prospective poetry writers?
I'm gonna teach something that's aimed at poetry, but what someone takes from it is totally fine. So I do a lot of work, especially with folks who don't write poems often, or if ever. So sometimes what they're going to write is going to be a paragraph or a couple paragraphs, based on the writing prompt I have. But and so I just encourage people to write. However it comes out is wonderful. If it's a poem, fantastic. If they end up with the start of a short story, that's great too. I'm not too picky on that.
Well, I want to ask you a little bit more on the workshops because I don't find very many of them. I mean, there's definitely writer groups all around, and I've attended some and we've presented some. We've also done things in our company where we've gone in front of, writing at universities, students, a professor would bring us in and that. But as far as what you do, the writing workshop, not very many. Like I think I've been to like two, and I just don't see them in terms of marketing and that. Can you maybe give your top two or three takeaways or tips that you give to the people that attend your workshop? I think that'd be very useful to our viewers.
Yeah, and the workshops I run are fun. I've run them everything from in a library to with as a team building exercise for a board of directors. It's all a way of
Nice.
kind of sharing your experience and what you have. And some of the main takeaways are you know don't worry too much if I'm talking about poetry and you're not really sure if you're a poet or what a poem is don't worry about that. What I encourage people to do is to write the poems that you wish, the kind of poem that you wish had been there in high school when you went into a class and probably didn't like poetry. What would have made you like poetry? Write that kind of poem. Reinvent the form. Don't worry about what you've been told it is, and see what happens. And then also, don't stress yourself too much about how good or bad it is. The main thing is to write. Even if
Okay.
you write a terrible poem, spend 15 minutes writing a terrible poem, you're still a better poet after those 15 minutes. Because sometimes writing is practice, just like shooting layups in a driveway or practicing piano. You don't just sit down and write masterpieces. So don't stress yourself out and keep yourself from writing because you're worried it's not going to be perfect. Let it be imperfect
Right.
and get better.
I love that. I love those tips for sure. And the first one that you said is something that we commonly find as we take that first step with our client authors, where they have a perceived idea or a notion, right? Even, I've had several authors say, "Oh, the manuscript's great," and they've got their outline, they've been right into it, and maybe they have 100,000 words. And I just say, well, we're going to, in our first step, our first meeting, even if you have what you think is your first draft ready to go to copy edit, we're going to do a mind map book build, and we're going to deconstruct maybe with our skilled content editor, excellent writer, deconstruct and say, just be open to that process. Right. And so and sometimes it takes a little bit for our clients together. So I love that. And then the second thing that you said that is so key is just do the content download. You're not a copy editor. Don't give yourself, don't be hard on yourself because of it. Maybe you don't have a degree in editorial. Don't get on yourself, and don't, go over the same paragraph, for 5 years, and, which happens in that. But
Oh,
it
yeah.
is just like you said, it is a practice behavior for sure. And just like anything that you practice, like you said, you get better. And as you bring other people that are experts and are really great at it, you learn from them. So great, excellent advice. Okay, I want to dig in to what I love is the title of your current release here, and I'm going to put the buy link in the ticker here, but it's tell us about your fourth book, At the Corner of Fantasy and Maine, Disneyland, Midlife, and Churros. I'm excited for you to talk about that, please.
Yeah. This book came, it was a, kind of a weird experience where basically I turned about 49 and woke up one day thinking about Disneyland. And it was strange because I found myself, subscribing to podcasts, reading books, reading articles, watching YouTube videos about Disneyland and Disneyland history, and wasn't sure why, wasn't sure what was going on. It felt like a bad TV sitcom midlife crisis episode or something. And so my wife is also a writer. She sees me doing all this research and says, what are you writing? And I was like, I'm not writing. This is just ridiculous. And she's like, you're a writer. You're doing research. Just write. So I started writing poems. And at first they were, poems about roller coasters and Disneyland. But as I kept writing, found it went on to be about, the death of my parents, about memory, about growing older. And what started as a book, as a project that I thought was just, a lark, ended up being, I think, my best book ever. I think there's so much that ended up being packed into this because, I tell students this all the time, but then I forgot to listen to it myself, in that when we write poems, we're just trying to figure out intellectually what's going on emotionally with us, because sometimes there's not a lot of communication between our emotions in our head. And by writing this book out, I figured out what was going on, why it was going on, and, got what I think is a great book out of it. So that's what happened. So it's a book about getting older and Disneyland and churros.
I totally. I love that. And how did you come up with the title?
The title, yeah, it had so many titles as I was working on this. But then that one stuck out because I started writing. I found that it was a good kind of writing prompt to look at the places in Disneyland where two different lands meet up and look at what's there, in Is it a turkey leg store? Is it a corn dog stand? Is it, the castle's shadow? And so looking at these places where two lands intersect, and what's there, and what kind of poem can I write about that? What kind of energy can I find there? And my favorite was at the corner of Fantasy and Main. Just fit the project because Disneyland and the whole thing about fantasy, but also Main Street, which is the normal, the everyday. So it's this book is really about where those things intersect, and I thought it fit.
So I didn't take a look at this. I probably should have, but is this a title that you'd already, have you worked with the Old Mill Press before? Was this a second or third title, or tell us about that, that engagement, if you would.
No, this was a luck, because I'd been working on this project for a few years, had a manuscript that I really thought was excellent. But the problem is it's a book of poetry about Disneyland. So Disneyland publishers were not interested in poetry. Poetry publishers were not that interested in Disneyland. And I was starting to give up hope that I would find a publisher. And then I just heard a random podcast where there's Dave Bossert, editor at the Old Mill Press, talking about a book of Disneyland history. And I thought it sounded interesting. So I went to the website and saw in with all these beautiful looking books about Disney history, there were a couple random poetry books. And so I was like, wait a minute, this might be a publisher who'd be interested. And fortunately they were. So yeah, a little bit of luck, but I am shocked to have found the publisher that intersects with Disney and poetry. So possibly the only one.
Right. Right. Well, and from our perspective, we're really, for all intents and purposes, all nonfiction, and we actually did publish a book of poetry one time. Kind of came out of a unique situation in 2020, but from our perspective, if someone, and I've been approached by a couple people, and my knee jerk inside, I wouldn't necessarily communicate it, is, oh my goodness, it's hard to market poetry in popular press, right? And I don't, and so I really haven't, that's an understatement, I know, but so really haven't pursued it, really didn't know much about it, but I'm now so intrigued. I'm going to dig in a little bit more now since I've been reading about you and getting to know you. So, wow, it's already, there's people watching this that might have similar stories and manuscripts and rejection, which there is, and trying to find the right lit agent, and then trying to be picked up from them. And even in this, very tough time after COVID, where, I don't know, is it every 5 minutes a book is uploaded to Amazon, and all the tools and all that. There's such a, I don't have to tell you, very non-industry standard, I call it kludgy, industry, craziness. So, Great for what you said and your encouragement. Let me just ask you one more question that can give encouragement. You talk about, the rejection and being used to that, but can you, what would you say, to yourself, your former self, right? When you were trying and getting the rejection that kept you going. And I'm going to say one more thing, sorry, about that. Comes to mind to me is that astronaut movie. I can't remember what it's called, but there's a life story about this guy that applied every year for 11 years to be a NASA astronaut. And on the 12th year, and they made a movie of it recently, he got it. And to me, I'm like, see, there it is. It's not 2 times, 3 times, 12 times. 12 years. Could you just add to that for these aspiring writers that need to try 12 times?
Yeah, I think there's so much of getting published that is just figuring out where your work even could fit, maybe. I think when most people start sending poems out to magazines or to anthologies or to presses, they're still figuring out the industry. They're still figuring out how this all works. So try not to be discouraged. Just do it, send it out, see what happens. Don't stress it, because the best thing is that there are wonderful human editors at these places. They're often overworked, so they're working through things quickly. But occasionally, if you get a rejection letter back that's got a handwritten note on it or something personalized from the boilerplate they've got, really take that to heart, because they don't have much time for that. But they're always looking for ways to really reach out and encourage writers. And so I am so grateful to all the small presses, because, at first I was getting lots of rejections, but at some point I started to actually hear back from the editors also. And that, I don't think I realized at the time what a big thing that is, and how that shows how close you're getting.
No, 100%, 100%. Yeah, I was excited when I heard from a Hudson book buyer distributor, and she called my phone number, right? And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's like crazy great to get that. So same idea. Yeah. Okay. Well, we're getting towards the end of the show. So again, the book is At the Corner of Fantasy and Maine. When people, even Google Matt, you'll see his greatness and what he's accomplished in all his books and all that he does. We didn't even talk about how you've been all over the world. I love that. So maybe we can have you back where you can talk about that. But Matt, what is the best way for people to, what is the various ways? What's the best way for people to connect with you?
To connect with me, possibly the best way is through my website, midverse.com. You can also find me on Facebook pretty easily. I actually got the facebook.com/Matt Mason, even though there's a bunch of other Matt Masons out in the world. But you can, just pick up my book at www.theoldmillpress.com. And, there's a lot of, if you Google Matt Mason poetry, you'll find a lot of ways in. So.
Fantastic. Yeah. And we'll put in the notes, of course, all of those links. And I thank you. I told you that this 30 minutes was going to go by really fast. It did. Yeah. I was looking for comment or questions. Looks like we're good, but thank you for joining us so early and on the fly. And we appreciate you, and keep up the good work of inspiring people not only to read, but to write poetry. And I look forward to getting to know your works better down the road. So thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for watching. Happy Saturday.